You have most assuredly come to the right place. It is the 118th day of the national emergency. It's the 46th day of our country's expression of civil unrest, looking for change, systemic change. And today, here in New York City, it's the third day that we've been phase 3. Phase 3 already in New York City. That's huge. All right, we've got a lot tonight. First of all, I want to thank everyone for donating to the Queen's Liberation Project last week. Some of the donations went, you can see here on their Instagram post, 200 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, mozzarella and tomato, homemade hummus and cucumber. There was a hot breakfast for the team that went down to Washington, D.C. for the protests over the weekend. Tons of food, lots of oranges. That was 400 Powerades. That's a lot. It was hot, and a lot of art. And that's one of the reasons why I really, really appreciate Queen's Liberation Project, because they are truly focused on the art and using art as an expression of the change that we want to see. And speaking of art and change, you remember way back when all this started? I mean, it seems like it was not a long time ago in some regards, and yet in some regards it seems like it was an eternity ago. Well, LA Magazine, in their current issue, they have an article, "The Unlikely Stars of the Quarantine." It's very interesting to me that this thing is happening so quickly now that we already have stars of the quarantine. And it was a very specific time. And, people rose to the occasion. I think citizens and artists rose to the occasion quicker than some of our leaders did, to be quite honest. But here you can see in those two yellow boxes, you remember we highlighted the graphics from Juan Del Con. And here, let's see if we can bring up the text. So Juan Del Con and Valentina were on the show. You remember they were the designers that created the safety match. And so the little article goes on to say that the safety match video, of course, went viral. And the very specific thing about that is when one little match simply steps out of the row while all the other matches behind him are lighting on fire, and he saves the day by stepping out of the way. And that was viewed roughly 1 million times. But it was very powerful and very helpful. And, that's the thing. That's one of the reasons why I like the folks from the Queen's Liberation Project, because they're using art. They're using art to communicate. And so here we have Juan and Valentina's video right now. I'm sure you've seen it before. This is actually very interesting to watch right now, because so much time has passed and so much has happened in our lives. Right? Do you remember that? Do you remember the first time you saw that? Doesn't it feel like a lifetime ago? Well, Juan and Valentina they've made a bunch of these videos. I pulled a couple more that I thought were real interesting. This is a thank you to the first responders. Amazing. And this needs no introduction.
No te escucho.
Hey, say hi.
Hi.
Que le deja el botón. La cámara.
不要说话。Sag Hallo.
Is that not your life? Does that not happen like 3 times a day? These Zoom calls, it's getting kind of crazy. And yet there is a familiarity to them now that there wasn't before. Okay, so the interesting thing I feel about both these things, the protest, we met the folks from Queens Liberation Project at a protest about a month ago down in Long Island City. And, they've been at it. They've definitely been at it every weekend, and they've had a couple of protests in the middle of the week. And that is one thing, this raising of our voice that is going to have to be sustained if we're going to see this kind of systemic change that we want. And then also just this idea that LA Magazine, so quickly in like 3 months, they're talking about the different stars, unlikely stars from the quarantine, talking about Carol Baskin from the Tiger King, D. Nice, the Cuomo brothers, like how quickly people, when we focus can change our lives, and how quickly things become indicative of a very specific moment. Well, all of those concepts, a specific moment, and then the repeated necessity of saying you're speaking your desires for change over and over again. These are something that our next guest, Debra Gittler, who is the executive director and founder of ConTextos in Chicago and El Salvador. I want her to speak to this idea of sticking with something, the kind of change that comes through years and years of effort. And sometimes you feel that benefit and you see the change, and then sometimes things are a little bit more elusive. So we're going to get Debra on Skype in just a minute, but first, I had to see this again, ladies and gentlemen. Come on. Franklin Rankin and Squidward. How many times can you see that in a lifetime? 1 billion. You see what I'm talking about? You can watch that over and over again 1 million times and never get tired, because every time you watch Squidward and the way he's dancing to Frank's guitar, like, Squidward's always got different moves. I see something different in him every single time I watch it. All right, now, besides being my cousin, Deb Gittler is Ezra's mom, and also the executive director and founder of ConTextos. And ConTextos is an educational NGO working in El Salvador and Chicago. And like I said, I think she's going to be able to shed some light for us on this concept of, if we want radical social systemic change, it is something that we're going to have to focus on for a very long time. So let me bring her right in right now. Cousin Debra, hello.
Hi, Scott.
How are you?
I'm great. This is so fun.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm so happy that you had a
I'm
moment.
gonna maybe.
I know
I'm gonna
that
move because my in his week.
Okay. Okay. This is what's great about it. It's it's all portable. We can go. We can move around. Inside, outside. There we go.
All right.
There
now
we
you
go.
guys get
Oh,
to
nice.
that.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay. There we are. Is that nice? Comfortable?
Yeah, I'm going to turn on the light.
Yeah, turn on the light. Why not? We got it. Let's turn it on.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I really appreciate it. Now, if everybody, everyone should know that you just literally dashed from Chicago to Michigan. You were on the road for a couple of hours, and now you've just landed, and we've got this going. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So ConTextos, give us a little bit of background. Like, how did you begin, and why did you choose El Salvador?
So most of our work in ConTextos right now focuses on personal narrative, memoir, story as a tool. What we say is to help move from hurt to healing. But storytelling is both a process, a therapeutic process, as well as a process for advocacy and change, right? We know stories can provoke changes in how other people see and think about themselves in the world. We started, however, 9 years ago in El Salvador, where I had been working previously. So I had lived there for 4 years, working on a national education reform program, very traditional international development, USAID and the World Bank, an enormous amount of money around education reform. And in candor, it didn't seem to be very effective. It was good at spending a lot of money. And so I left that initiative and ended up coming back to El Salvador about a year and a half later, launching ConTextos, and we started off really to address education and thinking about, I think, what many of us in the United States, the privilege of an education where books and reading are an expectation. That's not true everywhere in the world. In Latin America, in my experience, most learning is rote, memorization, and dictation, and literacy is considered a mechanical skill. So once you've accomplished your mame, mi, mo, mu, you're kind of done.
Wow.
So we started off with the goal around promoting, how do we promote critical thinking and dialogue? Not just reading fluency, not just reading comprehension, but how do we get young people to really start questioning instead of just repeating and memorizing? And what we found over the years, the first few years of trial and error, as we were training teachers and bringing different resources in, is that the real changing point and what made powerful learning environments is that when kids do start asking different kinds of questions and being asked different kinds of questions, the natural human instinct to share the story is very strong, to share your own story. We often hear that the best way to become a writer is to read, and write. So about 3 years into our work, the third graders we had started with, who are now in sixth grade, asked us to come and hear some of their writing. And the writing was unbelievably profound and deep because the environment in El Salvador is harsh. I mean, poverty, migration, the footprint and the longstanding, trauma of colonialism, and well, we could go on to the history there, but
yeah. But so when you're talking about that, it strikes me that you're talking about nothing less than the tools for self-expression.
Absolutely. And so we pivoted pretty quickly. One of the things, what I didn't get to is El Salvador is probably even better known for its violence, particularly what we would call gang violence or street organization violence. And so what we found over and over again is the opportunity for self-expression is really transformational. And not just self-expression, to stand on a pedestal and talk about anything, but to talk about the self. And also the opportunity to explore the self. So our work really quickly has evolved. We do continue to work in schools, but we work in juvenile detention centers, in prisons, in reentry, and community-based work. We do law enforcement work. And that brought us into Chicago, which is my other home, where we similarly work with, we are not, our work is not based on identity politics. It's not if you're, brown or black, or it's about the experience of trauma and violence. We say, as I'm sure you've heard, hurt people hurt people. And if we want to stop hurt people from hurting people, we need to think about different points of entry. Right now, we think about the moment that, violence is committed, and then we punish the perpetrator, but we do not focus on healing at all. And I think we do not do a good enough job in anywhere that I work to recognize that trauma starts at the point of witness. witnesses become victims and victims will become victimizers. So how can we start thinking about restorative practices rather than punitive practices?
Wow. And so this goes to a lot of the work. We had a therapist on the show very early when in the pandemic, when we were all, hunkering down at home. And we started to talk about this notion of trauma. A lot of people are doing, great work with the mind and PTSD and things like that. And it sounds like what you're talking about goes right along with that kind of a thing, where people were seeing things, even just smaller elements of their life, like their ability to sleep, or their ability to, be in control of their weight or their habits. And a lot of that had to do with trauma that they had experienced.
Yeah, I mean, our work is certainly a trauma-informed practice. It's also a healing-centered approach. I think thinking about trauma and understanding trauma, I personally have not experienced what most of the individuals I work with have. Not to say I haven't experienced my own forms of trauma, but I think, part of this process of the othering and this scale of trauma or of pain, that for those of us who don't experience it but try to understand it, it just brings back to why story is so powerful. I've learned so much in this work, and a couple anecdotes that stand out is when this is the norm, when by norm, and I'm referring to the south or west sides of Chicago or many parts of El Salvador, if it's the norm, you don't talk about it because everybody's experiencing. It doesn't stand out. In the last 4 weeks here in Chicago, we've had 4 of our program participants murdered. One program participant. There's never the time for recovery. You live in like a reverberating echo chamber of that trauma and grief. And for any of us who've experienced grief, or heartbreak of any kind, we know how difficult it is to get out of it. And that's when you have resources and it's an isolated incident. But when you're in environments where that's a norm, and generational norms and maybe even century-long norms, how do we support the healing? I think that's a huge question. And I certainly don't think that our work alone does that, but I think it is a really powerful and critical piece.
And so you were mentioned, I think it was 2 Sundays ago, in an opinion article. Kate, I think we have that link that we can set, the link from the Chicago Sun-Times. And did you have something to do with helping get that article published? Or, because to me it strikes me as that's someone's story getting out there.
Yeah, so Charles, hopefully you'll invite me back with Charles. I've known Charles for about 1.5 years, and his story has been incredibly powerful to me. And one of the things that we work really hard to do is working with Charles as he's learned to tell his story, to use his story, to determine how and when his story is, unbelievably powerful, right? He was shot 21 times when he was 15. I believe it was by the time he was 17, he was incarcerated. It's just stuff that shouldn't happen. Right? Now he's 25 and he's so thick into the system, and trying to get out is not as easy as put down a gun and pull up your bootstraps, right? So it's taken us 1.5 years of working together, knowing each other, for him to have the strength, the courage, the perseverance to feel that putting his story out into the world is gonna have a benefit for both him and others. Whereas so often what I've seen is this sort of trauma porn, especially when it comes, I think, to Black pain in America. United States of America, right? We look at it, we watch it like a car accident, and then it goes by. And that's probably why we're in the moment we are. We've seen this incredible violence, and we literally can't move. So you just stare at it, and it changes the feeling, I think.
Mm-hmm. And sharing the stories, that's the only way that I have had anything kind of come into my life. I just have to admit, I'm just not a complete book hound. I like to read, I enjoy reading, but a lot of what I experience doesn't come, unfortunately, through books. And
the written word, that it actually has to be written, or that a book is the only form, I think it's like, yoga is a form of meditation, so is running. There are many ways that we can access language And story, movies are story. It gives us an anchor that we can share, but we can interpret in different ways. We connect to it in different ways. There's an absolute. I cannot disagree, what is on the screen at this moment, at this time. But I can believe that the painting behind you is beautiful or not. It may remind me of my grandparents, and it might not. It allows us to have additional stories that spark in every direction. And I think that's why, our work focuses on the written word, particularly memoir writing. But we partner with organizations that use theater or the visual arts in similar ways. A shared experience that allows us to both, to connect as human beings with that object or that, and with each other. Those are really, that's what cavemen did around the fire, right? Like, this is the essence of humanity.
Yeah, and I think being able to find more conduits and more funnels in order to hear more different stories, because I think one of the things that we're all, I don't know if we're waking up to it. Oh, there we go. We glitched for a second. Yeah, that's okay. But I don't know if it's something that a lot of people are just waking up to right this second, or it's something that we've maybe suspected in the back of our minds. But the breadth of stories that we've been exposed to in our society and in our culture is very limited. And so one of the things that this moment, I think, is also unleashing, if you will, is the ability for us to share other stories that we may not have shared before. Yeah.
I think I just listened to this podcast from this woman in Britain. She's a Black woman in Britain. Her book was the first book by a Black British woman to ever reach the top of their charts. But what she said, it was about white fragility and anti-racism. But she ended her midway, said, start with the stories. And it wasn't just reading all of the critical literature that's coming out now, which is important. I think also it's frustrating, but it's important. But go back to the stories in the canon, right? Black people have been reading stories about Blackness and writing stories. Not enough of them have been published, but they've been writing that for a long time. And certainly I wasn't exposed to that as I was growing up. And now I can't get enough Baldwin. There's plenty, Latin America has its stories, and in stories, we don't need truth in nonfiction. Stories reveal truth, and they allow us to reveal our own truths. And so that's, for me, one of the biggest takeaways of this time, right, is to start with the stories.
Right. Okay, so one more question. I don't want to keep you all night, but okay, the pandemic hits in March. You're going along, you're balancing these two, epic programs, one in Chicago, one in El Salvador. The pandemic hits. What happens to you? How do you pivot? What goes on?
We transitioned. I think our office closed March 17th, and March 18th, that Monday anyway, we started our programs digitally. And so, we're on Zoom a lot. And there's different levels of success. We started new programs. Now we're re-entering the world, and so a hybrid world. I think we've all learned that there is a capacity for connection digitally that maybe we didn't anticipate. There's also plenty, that is lost via that. But we've certainly seen during this time, it is a time of so much shared trauma. We're all in crisis. And we have more time to listen and hear. And I think as we're going back into the world, it's pretty clear, I don't know, nobody wants to go back into this country the way it was. It just doesn't make sense, going back into systems that were not working, and then they're not working even worse. So we've pivoted quickly, and civil unrest has happened all over the country, and there was a brief period of time where I felt both scared and hopeful. Chicago right now is in dire straits, and I think, again, the stories of Charles, unless we create platforms for people to tell and share their stories that are healing platforms and provoke dialogue, there is no single root cause of these problems. Fixing, if that's even what we want to do, healing, it's going to take a really long time. Personally, I've seen the narrative that jobs will fix violence. I've now seen the narrative that policing is going to fix violence. I think that healing is what's going to, healing and investment, but people need to feel ownership of the space around them, and they can't even do that if they don't have ownership over their own stories and their own past.
Wow. Amen. Amen to that. amazing. That really is, Debra. I am so proud of you, and I'm so amazed. The work that you're doing is nothing less than stunning and absolutely necessary. So, thank you for sharing a moment. And let's have more.
We have, if you go to our website, ConTextos.org, CONTEXTOS, there's going to be links. We have hundreds of memoirs written by young people who have been deported, who have been incarcerated, who, have lived the absolute worst that the Americas can offer young people. And their stories, every single one of them are stories of resilience and love. Every single one of them defies our assumptions and challenges our stigmas. And I encourage people to read them. These are, we call the guys that we work with and girls authors because they've all become published authors and their work deserves to be read and shared. So I invite everybody to do that.
And we shall. We have the link up right now. People will find you and people will read it.
All right. Love you, Kate.
Love you, Kate. Kate says she loves you back, Deb.
Behind every man.
Exactly.
Love you guys.
Love you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Big hugs to everyone in the fam. And Ez especially.
Thank you. Love you guys.
Love you.
And
love
to everybody who's watching, love you too.
Bye. Oh my gosh. Brilliant people. Brilliant people in the family. That's why I just kind of, I came to New York. I hid out. Just hid out. The family is full of outstanding, brilliant people. And here, I have another, I don't know, Franklin called this a bedroom jam. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. This I think is his latest quarantine. Oh, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. And then here, for you comedy aficionados, Taylor just sent me another script. I'm itching to read it. I don't know. Kate, have you read it yet? I don't think Kate.
I just saw it.
She just saw that it came in. Taylor, thank you. We're going to look at that ASAP. But for right now, who doesn't need a little e-confessional?
Oh, Father Andrews, thank God.
Oh, yes. Yes, Ruby?
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been, a while since I last confessed.
Where are you?
I'm in my bathroom.
Oh, is something wrong? Are you hurt?
Keep your voice down, they'll hear you.
Oh, who's there?
My family.
I don't follow.
They're everywhere, Father. Even in my nightmares.
Nightmares?
I love my family, really I do, but my kids. With all the jumping and the screaming and the playing.
Well, a home filled with the laughter of children is...
Loud! It's loud, Father. And so many homework questions. I already finished kindergarten. It's their turn to put in the work.
Okay.
And Barry, he's the biggest child of them all. He makes a bigger mess than the kids. Being home all day doesn't mean you forget where the toilet seat is when you pee. You get it. Of course you do.
Well, I've never had a problem with that particular issue.
And why do people eat so much? Who do you think is cooking all the food? I know that I'm the best cook in the house, but still. Look at me, Father. Look at me.
Oh, wow. That was in your hair.
I don't want to feel this way. I'm home all day, but I can't even get away to take a shower or brush my teeth. And I know I smell, Father.
Ruby, please.
The dog won't even come near me anymore. Just follow the smell of sweat and sausage grease from today's breakfast. That's how you'll find me.
What was that?
They found me. It's too late.
No, Ruby. It's never too late. This is what I want you to do now. I want you to take a deep breath. Breathe in the love of Jesus Christ, and breathe out all your worries. Just breathe them out.
You know, I think I do feel better.
Oh my God, Ruby! Ruby! Oh my God, the horror. Hal? Ruby. All right, 10 Hail Marys.
My gosh, Keith Kupferer and Natalie Blessing, ladies and gentlemen. Script written by Taylor Rankin. Editing by, of course, Sean Vaughn. That seamless, silky editing you need in those comic tributes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us. I hope you have a safe, wonderful weekend. Cousin Deb, again, thank you for spending those moments with us. You said a lot of really important stuff, and I can't wait to continue the conversation and hear more stories. Ladies and gentlemen, hunker, hug, and haven. And then remember, because we're phase 3, mask, maintain that distance, and multiple hand washings throughout the day. Hey, remember, you came to the right place. We'll see you next Tuesday.